Hey, welcome back. And if you're new here, my name's Christina Kent and I'm a fine artist based out of San Francisco. So I've recently been traveling, and while I was traveling, I didn't really do much painting. And I just got back, and I find that every time I take a break from painting and then I come back, I have all of this inertia when it comes to painting again. And I feel like I don't know, my inner critic is extra strong. And so when you combine not painting and then also the tiredness that comes with travel, maybe the jet lag, I find that it's really hard sometimes to get back into my creative groove. And on the one hand, I'm really excited to get back to my studio and get started on some big projects. I'd already prepped some canvases before I left and was kind of getting started on some ideas. So I really want to get back to that. But on the other hand, just not painting much over the past 2 weeks, I feel really rusty. And even after painting for years and doing hundreds of paintings, every time I take a break, I always feel rusty. And for me, it might sound ridiculous, but my inner critic says things like, you'll forget how to paint, you're not going to be able to get back into it, you're not going to be able to do it anymore, you're too rusty, you lose your edge. I mean, even saying it now, it sounds really funny, but in the moment, it does kind of feel real when I'm trying to sit down and create. I feel this weight of the inner critic on my shoulders. And maybe you're in a similar situation where you've taken a break from painting for a while for whatever reason, and you're coming back to it and you're feeling a little rusty. So I thought I could make this video, and together we can kind of jump back into painting. So today we're going to do a really simple, really kind of low barrier to entry exercise in the sketchbook to get us creating again and to start building up that creative momentum so we can really start to tackle our bigger projects. Because I think one of the biggest hurdles when we want to do something creative but we feel nervous about it is getting started. We can have this really big inertia that keeps us still in one place. But as soon as we get the ball rolling, as soon as we get things started, then we can build momentum. And just as a quick note, I'm super excited to share that I recently launched a new portrait painting course on my website. In this course, we take the portrait and we break it down into simple light and shadow shapes. Then we add nuance to create and fully resolve the portrait. So if you want to see the step-by-step, real-time process for my portrait painting, be sure to check that out. Okay, let's get started with the exercise. For this exercise, I'm going to be using acrylic gouache paints, but you can use whatever kind of paints you like. I'll also be using these little craft brushes, and I'm going to be painting in my Moleskine art sketchbook, which is a nice sketchbook for acrylic gouache, sketching, and also you can do a little bit of watercolor in this one too. But a small sketchbook is really nice. We don't want to do anything too big for this exercise. Keep it small, keep it simple. And then I'm going to be using my Stay Wet palette just for mixing the colors. And I have a jar of water for cleaning my brushes and some paper towels. If we're feeling uninspired or rusty, sometimes we can look at the blank page of the sketchbook and just feel really intimidated. So for this exercise, we're going to keep it really simple. We're not going to worry too much about what to paint, and we're just going to focus on the inspiration around us. So literally, I'm just going to look at what is on my kitchen table and choose something to paint from here. These are really simple objects, nothing special, nothing fancy, but the nice part is that by having a simple motif, then I think it makes it a lot easier to get started for a quick sketch. So I have this water bottle that's got some interesting colors. I have this jar here that's sort of transparent, some little coffee mugs, and a roll of paper towels. Honestly, I'm kind of drawn to the orange color of the water bottle. I don't usually do stuff like that. But I am not as excited about the lack of contrast between that and the table. I feel like they're very similar, so I kind of want a bit more contrast. I also like the shapes of the mugs, but doing all three feels a little complicated. Maybe I could do just one. And then, yeah, the paper towel is interesting too. But also I notice kind of as I'm looking at an angle at the jar, it kind of has some interesting blue shadows that are blue reflections that are being caught here and that are kind of reflecting onto the table too. So that's kind of intriguing to me. I mean, like I said, it's still really simple, right? It's just a jar, but those are a little intriguing, and so I think I'm going to start with that. And if you'd like, you could also do the whole scene on your table, but honestly, that seems like a lot to me, and right now it feels intimidating. So I just want to focus on one simple object, just to keep it simple. So here's a photo of my view of the jar of what I'll be painting. If you want to follow along, grab your sketchbook and feel free to paint this, or you can find another object that you find interesting in your house and paint that instead. So for this exercise, I'm going to be using a limited palette of white, yellow, red, and blue. I'm working in acrylic gouache, but you could do this with oils, with watercolors, with really whatever medium you have on hand. Just get your favorite medium, get an object that you find kind of interesting, and then sit down with your sketchbook, with your canvas, and take some time to try to make a quick sketch of that object. And in particular, I think it's really helpful to set a time limit for this exercise. So maybe you'll give yourself 30 minutes or even 15 minutes. Sometimes the shorter the time limit, the better when you're trying to fight against this or when you're trying to build momentum and just get started, because I feel like if I give myself a really short time limit, then I don't have very high expectations, because you can say, hey, I only had, say, 15 minutes or 30 minutes. I'm not going to make a masterpiece. It's just enough time to get a few ideas down onto the paper. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm looking at the jar and I'm thinking about what are the colors that I'm seeing? What's the general shape and size? What relationships are in front of me? And in particular, is there anything that I find really interesting? Is there anything that I find sort of exciting that's grabbing my attention? And so, as I mentioned with the jar, one of the things that I found interesting were those kind of cool blue reflections of daylight on the jar and how that related to some of the other colors on the jar. And in general, I like to paint shiny things. I like things with highlights. I find those are just kind of fun to paint and a little magical when you can depict them on the page. So I also enjoy those elements on the jar too. And there's something so liberating about doing a sketch when you give yourself a really short amount of time and you're saying, okay, like you kind of give up on making a work of art and you say, okay, I'm just going to do what I can do in this amount of time. Like something about that, you're freed of the weight of expectation. And I find that to really help kickstart my creative process, especially when I feel like the inner critic is really holding me back. It takes a lot of pressure off of the art making process, especially if you have a big piece that you want to be working on, or maybe you have an exhibition coming up, or maybe you have a commission that you really want to do well on. Those pieces can cause us to put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And especially if we haven't been painting for a while, it can be really hard to jump back in when you feel that sort of pressure. That's why little exercises, little sketches like this can be so refreshing to our creative process. I've noticed oftentimes I will wait until I feel motivated to do something. Like I will wait until I feel inspired to start a painting, or I'll wait until I feel motivated to work on a YouTube video or do other aspects for my art business. And I've noticed that sometimes it's just so much easier to just jump into it and just get started, because sometimes if I wait, I end up procrastinating, especially if I feel a bit uncertain about the task. The longer I wait, the more intimidating it becomes over time, and kind of the more inertia seems to start to build up. Versus if I just jump right in, like say I'm feeling nervous about painting, but then I just jump right in with a simple exercise like this, it's almost as if I feel like all of the inertia that I was building up, all of that fear that I had around the activity, I realize that when I actually get into the activity, the fear just seems to almost disappear. And so I find it's so interesting how my mind works in that way. And I think that that's why exercises like this can just be really helpful when we're in that state, when we're feeling maybe fear about getting started with the creative process. I think waiting for motivation or waiting for inspiration can be really tricky. Of course, it feels amazing to paint when we're feeling really inspired and carried away by our ideas. It's so much easier to get into the creative flow. But at the same time, if we depend on that to make our art, then sometimes we can fall into this kind of negative cycle where we aren't making work, and then the inner critic can kind of tell us negative things because we aren't making work, and it can bring us further and further away from our inspiration and from our motivation. So I feel like by just getting started, by just making a small sketch, that's a way to sort of break this cycle and get us back to a point where we're painting and we're working. And that puts us in a position where we're much more open to receiving inspiration. It goes back to this idea that painting and creativity, it really is a practice. If you do it every day, if you keep showing up, if you keep doing exercises or working or trying out different ideas, regardless of how inspired you feel, then you're gonna see really great returns. And I think in the long run, you'll get more inspiration as a result. And this exercise is not about the outcome, but if you're curious, here's the final version of my little sketch. Yeah, is it the best sketch I've ever done? No, but are there things that I enjoyed while I was doing it? Yes. I love this little sketch because it helped me kind of break out of my funk and get back into the groove of creating. So that's all I have for today. I hope you found this exercise helpful, and I hope it gave you a boost of inspiration and motivation to get started on your creative work. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, a huge shout out to my supporters on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for supporting this channel and making these videos happen. If you like my art, if you like my videos, and you want to help me make more, check out my Patreon at the link. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.